Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I can't write and I can't spell. It's the privilege of having a first-class education. I slightly butchered that quote, but
No, I know what you were going for there.
yeah.
We're doing the talented Mr. Ripley, not the talented Mr. Ridley.
No promises here.
Yeah. Following up our Alien movie series, that's kind of an inside joke of over 4 episodes, but
I feel like we should have like some kind of like a running counter or like a bet going of like how long before one of us screws it up.
yeah.
And by one of us, I probably mean me.
Yeah.
And by screw it up, I mean intentionally try to screw you up.
No, this is our thriller movie for the year. We picked the talented Mr. Ripley, actually slightly because of that inside joke of not getting that right throughout our 4-episode podcast on Alien and Aliens.
Yeah, and I've always kind of been interested in this movie despite not really knowing much about it.
Yeah, like it's kind of got the who's who of the up-and-comers from the 90s in it.
Yeah, like it's funny. I felt like such an old man watching this movie because I'm like, oh, look, it's a young Gwyneth Paltrow and like a young Jude Law and like a shockingly young Matt Damon.
Right.
Even a young Philip Seymour Hoffman. So.
Yeah, it's a really cool star-studded cast.
Yeah,
We've
really.
now talked about pretty much all of the main stars and the main players.
Pretty
in this,
much.
but,
I just got it all out of the way. Super. Yeah, that's why I'm a pro.
Yeah.
I was going to say, actually, this is kind of jumping ahead a bit. The only thing, my only really real context for this movie is I read the Disaster Artist book right before the movie came out, and they made a lot of parallels between Greg and Tommy's relationship and then Greenleaf's and Ripley's relationship. So I sort of kind of knew it was like this twisted, vaguely homoerotic relationship and something about class, and that was kind of all I knew going in.
Right.
Which was nice because like the movie went places that I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because the first half plays out one way and then the second half of the movie plays out very differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what's interesting about that even is I think your mileage may vary on one half or the other half depending on what you're going into this movie expecting.
I feel like that's been happening to me specifically because everything is about me lately, where it's just there's a lot of movies I've seen recently where like there's kind of a hard turn in the middle and then the second half of the movie is almost kind of different. Like, do you remember that movie The Lobster I mentioned on our 2010s draft?
Yep.
Kind of similar to that. So anyways.
Yeah, no, and I think we're going to have a few other reference points to talk about as we get into this primer episode. And this is our primer episode, so we're going to be as spoiler-free as possible about The Talented Mr. Ripley, a movie that is 25 years old as well this year, which is pretty wild. So
wow.
Yeah.
Where does the time go?
Yeah, came out the same year as The Matrix.
Ooh, that's unfortunate. Yikes.
Anyway, let's get into the plot.
So Matt Damon plays the eponymous Mr. Ripley, a very brilliant but lower-class young man. Mm-hmm. And through kind of, I guess you could call it happenstance, he ends up meeting with a older man named Mr. Greenleaf, whose son has kind of... It's the classic prodigal son story, right? He's frittered off to Europe, and now he's just wasting all his dad's money on frivolous, extravagant pursuits, right?
Right.
And again, through happenstance, Mr. Greenleaf comes to believe that Ripley, I almost said Ridley, but I stopped myself at the last second. He comes to believe that Ridley was a classmate of his son's at Princeton. And I shouldn't say, like, through happenstance. This is something that, you know, it's an image he's very clearly cultivating, right?
Right.
Actually, it's really interesting. In the first 10 minutes, we see Ripley, he's wearing a Princeton jacket. He's playing at some, like, you know, hoity-toity upper-class soiree.
Yeah.
He meets Greenleaf. They shake hands. He's like, oh, you go to Princeton. Like, my son goes to Princeton. He's like, oh, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Then we see him run across the street, gives away his Princeton jacket to, I guess, the rightful owner. Then he runs to, like, a music studio where he's working as a waiter, and we see him, like, you know, polishing people's jackets off and, like,
he's like one of those, like, concierges in a fancy washroom.
Pretty much, yeah. And then there's the other great scene where once the whole performance is over and everyone has left, he, like, starts tinkering with the piano, and then, like, an older, sympathetic janitor or something is like, kind of got to kill the lights, kid. Like, you need to get out of here.
It's very reminiscent of Good Will Hunting, if you've seen that movie.
Yeah, I was getting a lot of Good Will Hunting vibes. I was going to make the joke that I'm like, so this was the era where Matt Damon was typecast as geniuses from lower middle class backgrounds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And when we get into the deep dive, we might talk about that as well.
For sure. So, and then, yeah, like I mentioned, the older senior Mr. Greenleaf then decides he wants Ripley to go to Italy and convince his son to come home.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much the premise. That's pretty much where things jump off from. And I want to give this movie credit for, like, I have been tinkering with this new project, and I was looking at it recently, and I'm like, okay, well, it takes way too long for everything to, like, snap together.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I'm going to have to probably cut, like, 15 to 20,000 words out of this. But this movie, like, within 15 to 20 minutes, we're like, boom, we are in Italy with Matt Damon.
Yeah, it all happens, like, so quick that actually the first time I watched it, I did miss a little bit, and I went back later to kind of just catch up on what actually happened. I think you did a really good job, actually, of explaining the, like, basic premise of how this all gets set up, and then how we get to Italy, and we begin the relationship of Tom Ripley and Dickie Greenleaf.
Yes. What a name.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, too. And I mean, this isn't too spoilery, but, like, how Tom just sort of, like, slithers into Dickie's life, and, like, Dickie is this, like, very gregarious and very charismatic guy where he kind of just, like, he has just multiple lovers and, like, multiple people that just kind of hang off him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is a guy who put all his stats into charisma. Right. And then pretty quickly on, Tom kind of reveals why he was sent here, and then they decide that they're going to maybe turn Tom into a double agent, and then Dickie is going to keep stringing his dad along for money, and he's going to keep spending money on Tom, and then it just keeps, it dovetails from there, let's say.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the first half of the movie, you really don't know where Ripley's going with this, if this is some part of some bigger plot to convince Greenleaf to come back. Like,
yeah.
I was always kind of on the fence about what his true motivations were in the first half.
He's very there's not a lot of interiority to him, at least in the beginning, and then there's a lot of, like, I thought it was really interesting how he's our protagonist and we're following him along, and it's a very young, very pretty, very charismatic Matt Damon, but there's some very chilling moments early on where you're just like, oh.
Yeah, yeah, and we're going to talk about those in the deep dive for sure, because I agree. There was, like, even just one specific moment where I was like, oh, this is going to get dark.
Yeah, this is, oh, wait, this is weird. Yeah. Oh,
exactly.
It's a thriller, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, characters and people you may know, you've already talked about Matt Damon playing the talented Mr. Tom Ripley. He is a household name at this point. Like, we've already mentioned Good Will Hunting.
Everybody knows Matt Damon.
Yeah, we don't have to go into too much detail about who Matt Damon is. I think the last movie I saw him in was Air last year, movie I really liked, probably on my long list for best movies of 2024. Had a lot of fun with it. But
he's really like a Tom Hanks style where, like, I don't think he's done many bad movies.
No,
he just shows up in roles and you're like, oh, hey, it's Matt Damon.
Funny enough, he's in one of my favorite Ridley Scott movies, which is
The Martian?
The Martian.
Ah, I haven't seen that one.
No way.
Yeah, really.
Oh my God. Jess and I rewatched that last year, and I had forgotten just how good of a movie that is. Like, it's stealthily an incredible movie, like 9 out of 10.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard good things. I just never really got around to it.
Yeah.
But and then he was also in Oppenheimer last year.
Yeah. He's doing a lot. I forgot he was in Oppenheimer.
Yeah, everybody was in Oppenheimer.
Yeah, that's
literally everybody.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we've got Jude Law playing Dickie Greenleaf. Honestly, this is my favorite Jude Law performance now.
Yeah, I haven't seen Jude Law in much, to be honest, but he fully embodied this role.
Yeah, he's an extremely charismatic, good-looking dude that you can just, like, you understand why people just, like, gravitated towards him, right? And he plays the character extremely well. Jude Law, you may know from the Fantastic Beast movie series. He's in the 2 movies, the Sherlock Holmes movies, alongside Robert Downey Jr. That's where I grew up
Oh
with him.
yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
He was in Gattaca, which Jason and I did last year, which ended up on Jason's top 5 movies of last year. He's pretty versatile English actor, and like I said, I think I haven't seen Jude Law in a ton of things other than all of the stuff I just named. But like I said, this is actually, I think, his best performance.
Yeah.
And something that he did get recognized for later, and we'll talk about that in the deep dive as well.
Okay, nice.
Gwyneth Paltrow playing Marge, who
This is a pre-Goop Gwyneth Paltrow.
yes, pre-Goop.
Goop.
I was wondering which one was going to bring that up.
Yeah.
But
sorry, Gwyneth. It's all right. I won't. You know what? Keep going.
yeah, we'll try to like pass through all of the weird controversies that she's a part of, but we have acknowledged it.
What was that like weird? It was like there was some kind of scandal with her last year where it was like something about like a skiing incident where like another billionaire was suing her, and it was apparently it blew up. It was like the most ridiculous thing ever.
I think there's just like a new scandal with her like every month or so, and most of it related to Goop and stuff she says on Goop. But
stuff she says
that's
on Goop.
here nor there.
Yeah. By the way, hey, one more thing. I have one more punch left. I've been holding this for a while.
Okay.
So you're Gwyneth Paltrow. You want to invest millions of dollars in this like alternative health lifestyle brand. Why the fuck do you call it Goop? No, why the fuck do you call it Goop?
Because Goop is so not forgettable.
Yeah. Hey, fuck. Oh, she got me. She got me on that one.
Yeah.
Is it an acronym for like good oral ocular prescription? I don't know.
I couldn't tell you. I've never thought about it harder than
just
what
now.
we just now.
Okay. Well,
talked about.
Sound off in the comments if you know what Goop stands for.
Yeah, no, Gwyneth Paltrow's she's honestly a Nepo baby. She was big in the 90s and early 2000s. Like, she was in Royal Tenenbaums, movie that I really loved earlier
She's
this
a
year.
Fantastic actress.
Yeah, she's actually like a really good actress. That's something
Yeah.
that like we should say is like, I actually, every time she's in a movie, I'm like, you are really good at this.
Yeah.
I wish you were
right.
in doing more of this and less of the other
Less
stuff.
of that other fucking shit that you do.
Yeah.
I mean, like, guys our age, people our age are mostly gonna know her as Pepper from the MCU. Even in those, she's great though.
Yep.
Like in a lot of those Iron Man movies, she's more likable than Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, shockingly.
Right.
Yeah, she kind of anchors those movies, especially like the first couple, right? So
yeah, and again, just a testament to her acting abilities. I feel like, you know, that happens a lot in movies, right? Where you have a wacky character and then you pit them against like a more grounded character,
right?
Like the straight man and the foil. And it's really easy for the straight man to just be boring and forgettable, but like she somehow acts it in such a way where you're like, oh, I really like Pepper. I like this lady.
Yeah, I know. And then after that, I was shocked. I didn't know that Cate Blanchett was going to show up in this. And she's like, you know, one of the best actors of the last probably 30 years. She's playing Meredith in this movie. It's a very interesting performance, not in the way that she performs it, I guess, but in the way that her narrative thread is woven throughout this movie.
It's kind of funny, and you might have to cut this out, but it's like she shows up very early on. She has a little bit of romantic chemistry with Matt Damon. Then like 50 minutes go by, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, wasn't Cate Blanchett in this movie? And then she shows up again. I'm like, there she is.
Yeah. It's interesting how she ends up getting, like I said, woven into the narrative structure of this one. So we're going to talk about her a lot more in the deep dive, but I think that's really all you have to know. But, you know, she's, like I said, she's an A-lister. She was in Lord of the Rings. She was in, most recently, I can't remember if she won any Academy Awards for Tar, but that was her big movie of the last 5 years.
Again, to use the MCU comparison, she was Hel, the goddess of death in Thor Ragnarok.
Which honestly is a pretty small role, I think, comparatively, but it was something like, if you said to me, like, say something about the Thor movies, that's top 3 things that come to mind.
Cate Blanchett was in the one good one.
Yeah, exactly. So great actress, one of my favorites. And then we have a couple other actors that just kind of appear throughout the movie, and the first one being Philip Seymour Hoffman, who we just recently talked about on The Big Lebowski. I, again, was floored every time he was on screen by just how great of an actor he is.
Oh, yeah, he's fucking incredible, and playing such a non-Brant this time around.
Yeah,
right?
I actually can't wait to talk about his performance in this movie. Like, it's a relatively small part, but he just excels at the relatively small parts, so that it's going to be fun talking about his performance.
He's
again.
a character actor.
Yeah,
exactly. The man is a character.
Yeah. After that, we have a character that we talked about, or an actor that we talked about previous to starting this episode, but Jack Davenport makes an appearance in this. Who does Jack Davenport play again?
Peter.
Yes.
Peter.
That's something that we're going to have to probably talk about in a little bit more detail, but you're going to remember him from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Yeah. James Norrington.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like trying to think of where I knew him from, and Jess was like, "Oh, it's Jack Davenport," and I was like, "Where do I know him from?" And she was like, "Pirates of the Caribbean," and I was like, "Elizabeth!"
So like he shows up and starts talking, and for a second, and I was like,
such a distinctive voice.
I know.
Oh
for a
my
second
God.
though, I'm looking at him and I'm listening to his voice, and for a second I was like, Hans? Like Hans Gruber? Is that you? And then I was like, I had to look it up. I'm like, oh, it's that guy.
Yeah. And then Philip Baker Hall, I wanted to round out another massive character actor from a few generations. He's the older guy. He shows up. He's the private investigator near the end of the movie.
Oh yeah, that guy was great too.
Yeah. He's known for being one of the best character actors of all time. So he's got a very memorable face. Like as soon as he pops on the screen, like I literally went, "Oh, it's that guy."
Yeah. It's funny how like sometimes being just a little weird looking can actually benefit you in Hollywood.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like, oh, it's that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole episode of weird looking people.
Yeah. Maybe we will. I think somebody pointed out to me once that it's like if you look at all the A-list male actors, they're all kind of funny looking.
Yeah.
Like Nicolas Cage, Jeff Bridges a little bit.
Well, even like the character or the actors who are like actually like attractive, like objectively attractive people, like Ryan Gosling, he kind of has like a face that like how half of his face kind of like droops a little bit lower than the other half of his face, right?
He's
like,
a little asymmetrical.
Yeah, and apparently it's the asymmetry that
the camera loves a little bit of asymmetry.
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's kind of the main cast and the people that you probably know and the reason to maybe get excited about this movie. It's directed by Anthony Minghella, who I hadn't actually heard of him as a director before, but he was a big director in the 90s and then early 2000s. He did a lot of producing. So he did a movie called The English Patient, which I think won a bunch of Oscars. And he also produced Michael Clayton, which is a relatively famous
George Clooney movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw that movie in theaters when it came out, but it's another movie I was just too young for at the time.
Yeah, I actually watched it this year. Honestly, I was kind of mixed on it.
Oh, okay. Oh.
So what I'll say about it is that, and this is a weird tangent to be on, but
well, that's whenever it's a Michael episode where we're all promised weird tangents.
Yeah. So what I'll say is it's directed by Tony Gilroy, and what I've come to realize is that I'm not actually a big fan of Tony Gilroy as a director. It's just his style kind of just bounces off me. He did do the TV show Andor, which I think is probably the best Star Wars thing that's come out in the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And I did enjoy that.
Okay, I haven't seen Andor yet, but again, I've been meaning to.
Very, very
I
good.
know it's supposedly like, you're like, wow, they actually got one.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite Tony Gilroy thing. But Tony Gilroy, not actually connected to this movie at all, so...
Okay, yeah.
I'll circle back to the movie.
Let's rein this in, yeah.
Who is this movie for? Does it hold up to a modern watch? So I think where this movie is going to draw people in, it's honestly going to draw people in the way it drew you and me in. And that's, this is a movie that stars a bunch of very young, very attractive A-list stars that we've almost grown up with, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
For me, that was the main draw to this movie as well, is getting to see Matt Damon and Gwyneth Paltrow, Jude Law, like all of them kind of in their younger years. Like, and this movie is like, it's not quite an erotic thriller, but it honestly is borderline an erotic thriller. Like, these are very attractive people, and the movie plays up their attractiveness.
It certainly isn't shy about it. You know, there's this great moment where Jude Law sees Matt Damon without his glasses on, and he just goes, "Oh, without your glasses, you're not even ugly." And I'm like, "Whoa, hey, that's young Matt Damon you're talking to."
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, crazy.
The other part of this is that it's also shot on location in Italy, and it's maybe one of the most beautiful settings for movies.
It's certainly the lightest thriller I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's a thriller that almost entirely takes place during the day.
Right, yeah. And
shit. There was the quote I wanted to start this episode with was when Kate Blanchett says, pain should be saved for the daylight. And I was like, and I just remembered it now.
You could have used it for the next episode.
Yeah, well,
Maybe you still will.
maybe I still will.
And I think that this movie also kind of fits into almost like a subgenre of thrillers where it's like there's a plot about obsession and maybe an obsession with the upper class or an individual that you know from, like some sort of schooling or
Some
something
sort
like
of
that.
something.
Yeah, like, it kind of made me think of, I haven't seen Saltburn or Ingrid Goes West, but they're movies that, I have the general understanding of how the plot beats kind of play out, and it kind of reminded me of that a little bit.
Okay.
It also, in a way, kind of reminded me of like Nightcrawler as a thriller as well, about somebody whose obsession drives them to do pretty wild stuff.
Horrible, horrible things.
Yeah, exactly. This movie didn't make me as squeamish as Nightcrawler did, but definitely has its moments.
It certainly does, and we will talk about those in the deep dive. But
Yeah. But otherwise, like, who's this movie for? And do you think that it holds up?
this is a movie that I think really, really holds up. Who's it for, though? Honestly, it's so interesting because, like, I don't want to give my usual answer, which is just, if you like movies, you should
Right.
watch this movie. But it's, I guess, if you're more into like character-based storytelling, and you're more into like you said, kind of like these erotic thriller type things,
Mhm.
then you're really gonna like this movie.
Yeah, I think so
Yeah.
too. Like, I think it slots really well into that genre.
There are some sizzling moments in this movie where I'm like, oh my, like,
Oh my word!
yeah, like my monocle popped up. So I was like, oh dear. So yeah,
Maybe don't watch this with your mom.
Well, no, because your mom will be way too into it. You gotta like watch this on your own time. Don't watch this with your girlfriend either, because she'll also be way too into it. So watch this one by yourself.
That's funny. The one scene to sell a movie, so there's no movie clips online for this, so I just found just one scene on YouTube that I really, really liked, and that's the Tu veux fa l'Americano, when they sing in the jazz bar. And the reason why I kind of like it is because the song is extremely catchy, and it's kind of been bounced around my mind. I've listened to it a couple times since then. It's kind of a spin on a 50s jazz song from Italy, and that's actually something that we haven't mentioned yet, is that this movie does take place in the 50s.
Yeah, based on a book that was written in the 50s too.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
And honestly, what I'll say about that too is that the way that this story plays out, it would be impossible to make this movie set in 2024, I think.
Okay.
I think that the 1950s setting actually serves this plot and the story very well, and the characters very well, so I just wanted to note that. But sorry, getting back into the one scene, like, I think that this scene just does a really good job of just playing up like almost the erotic part of this movie, like that kind of part of the thriller of this.
The slow burn romance.
Yeah, it's just like all these beautiful people, like young people having fun together in a bar, like everybody's happy, having a good time kind of thing. It's almost like nostalgic, like, we're in our 30s, like you and I don't go out to the bars and do this kind of stuff anymore.
No,
but
I
it's
was just
like,
telling Blake that I got hungover off 3 drinks the other night, so I'm definitely not going out.
but it just, like, it makes you kind of nostalgic of that time period if you had it in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that that's a good selling point. When to watch this movie, I like this movie as a Sunday night thriller, or even a Sunday afternoon thriller. It kind of slots in there. Like, I wouldn't say this is quite a blockbuster movie, although it did quite well at the time.
I can see how this would have done well. And when was this? Like 1998?
1999.
1999. Yeah, I can see how this movie would do well, but it's certainly not. It's not like a blockbuster style thing.
No, exactly. Where to watch right now? It's not streaming anywhere currently, although I'm like 90% sure maybe last week or 2 weeks ago I was on Crave and it was streaming at that point in time.
Okay.
But I just rented this. You can rent this anywhere.
Yeah, I did my usual YouTube rental.
Yep.
By the way, I
And-
should start compiling all the YouTube rentals I've done for this podcast. And then the first thing we'll do once we get our Patreon set up is reimburse me.
Yeah.
Huh.
I think I've got you beat on expenses for the pod. But,
Yeah, all right, fair enough.
this is one that is worth your time, but it's not necessarily like you need to get to this one like this week kind of thing, right? Like, I thought this movie was good, but not like not like incredible, like not like genre defining necessarily.
Yeah, it's certainly I was actually watching it and I was more like just impressed that Hollywood actually greenlit a movie like this in 1999.
Well,
you know what I mean?
I think that erotic thrillers were having kind of a moment in the sun in the 90s, so
Okay.
it's maybe not necessarily as far of a jump as you might think, depending on that era.
I guess just considering the content of this movie, I was a little like, oh my. But then I guess, we'll talk about this in the deep dive.
Okay.
We will talk about this in the deep dive.
Sounds good. And yeah, I think that's it then for this episode. So we will see you next week. So following the deep dive of this movie next week, we're going to be doing our blockbuster movie to round out the end of August, which you and I haven't actually talked about what we're going to do for a blockbuster yet, but I'm sure it'll be something big and epic and fun. And
I'm sure it'll be blockbustery.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
sure.
So we'll have to talk about what to watch. But before that, if you have any movie recommendations, love to hear them in the comments.
Yeah, sound off.
Yeah, and then following that, it'll be yours and Jason's choice to.
Do you realize that it's almost been 2 years since I joined the podcast? I think it was September of 2022.
I mean, we're closing in on 3 years of the podcast.
Yeah,
total,
but I wasn't around for the first year, so
so it doesn't count.
Yeah, it doesn't count for me. Yeah, crazy, right?
Yeah, it is wild.
So much has happened.
So much has happened.
Crazy.
And we will see you next week to cover the deep dive of the talented Mr. Ripley.
Okay. Be safe. Be good. Don't develop any weird fixations on former classmen, I guess.
And tell your father.
And tell your dad.
Or your mom, actually.
Yeah, tell your dad.
Tell your dad to put this one on for your mom.
What? I will say, when Mr. Greenleaf asks Tom to go to Italy and convince his son to come home for $1,000, I did have a moment where I'm like, shit, I'd go to Italy for $1,000. Hey, fuck, dude, I'll do it.
Well, we'll talk about this in the deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Bye.